Hi, everybody. I wanted to talk to you today about what it was like as a teenager going to New York with my Aunt Golden and my Aunt Jane. I talk about my Aunt Golden a lot, but Jane was my dad's only sister, his only sibling, and she was so good to Wallace Jr. and me. She was by far and away our family for generations before and since the most spoiled child of that you could imagine because she was so sweet and loving. It was just people couldn't resist it. But it didn't ruin her and just made her more loving and more generous. She liked getting me in hand because she thought that I was too bookish and too much of a mama's girl and too much of a wallflower, and she wanted me to be more footloose and have fun the way that she had had when she was young. So she was always trying to work on me. But one thing that we had as a mutual goal was that she had always promised, and my Aunt Golden too, that when I was 13, they would take me with them to New York on a buying trip. And I'd had that goal in mind for years. I loved anything to do with the thoughts of going to New York. I liked to watch I've Got a Secret and To Tell the Truth. Those panelists, those shows were live back in those days. We had Arlene Francis with that diamond pendant around her neck, and Mr. Bennett's Surf, and Kitty Carlisle was on To Tell the Truth, and I thought she was so elegant. And I just knew when my aunts would come back from New York, people would, surround them with, what are the links this year? What are the colors? I was old enough finally to stay up and watch the Ed Sullivan Show. Anything that had to do with New York, I would say whatever money I could gather went three places mostly. About a third of it went to Richardson's drugstore for food purchases, or ice cream or Cokes with lime squeezed in it. About a third went to Tatterson's Ben Franklin 5 and Dime for my Tangy lipstick. And do you remember the CoverGirl foundation? It smelled like Noxzema. All kinds of beautification to be found at the Ben Franklin. But the other third went to the newsstand at Hudgens drugstore, where I would buy anything I could get my hands on that had to do with what was going on in New York. And if people went somewhere that I knew was a newsstand, I'd ask them to bring me a New York Times. And if I could get a Sunday one, it might take me a week, but I would read it all. If we didn't have Google then, I would have Googled everything, but I didn't have access to that. And I wanted to know what was current and what was going on. So finally the summer came when I was 13 and they were going to take me. I had to go to church camp first, and I came home from church camp with water in my ears, but I didn't tell my parents, and it didn't blossom into an infection, but I think we came home on maybe a Friday night or even Saturday, and we left bright and early on Sunday morning, my Aunt Golden and my Aunt Jane and me, to go to New York on this trip. And I wasn't subject to being car sick at that age. But I can tell you that when you get to New York and you get on one of those elevators and you have water in your ears, I thought, oh my goodness, this is going to be a long week. But I loved it from the minute I set foot in the city. I loved even the smell of the exhaust of the vehicles. I liked everything about it. But I knew, because I knew my Aunt Golden, that it was going to be work. And they had promised me some nice things, dinners and things, but there was no playing around during the day for any of these buying trips. My Aunt Golden was deadly serious about it. So the drill was to get up early. She got up earlier than anybody, Golden did. She did not like to be rushed. And she'd make sure we were up by maybe 7, and we would be down in the garment district by 8:30. I don't recall ever having meals in any of the hotels any of the years I ever went with them. We would have our breakfast down at a coffee shop somewhere near wherever we were starting to work that day. It was always the same thing, and now that it seems so remote, but the treat was to either have a toasted bagel or a toasted English muffin, because I don't think either one of those things was available at any of the local grocery stores. I don't think we even had Thomas's English muffins until much later than that. So it was a big treat. And so Aunt Jane would insist on, because she's a spoiled child, she would insist maybe she would have a fried egg on hers or something a little bit different. But Golden and I was always caught in the middle. I was trying to please her and I was trying to please my Aunt Golden. Well, before we went down there, they told me that I had certain responsibilities. And Aunt Jane had told me before we left home that I needed to buy a little book like this. And I just looked at this one, and I've had many of these little books over the years, but this one has the address and the phone number and room 4016 of the New York Hilton. I always kept a little book for every trip, or sometimes you'd carry the same one if you hadn't used up all the pages. But when you get down in the garment district, there are all these buildings, high rises, and there were lower buildings too, but we would concentrate our work. Maybe we would be at 1400 Broadway, or we'd be at 1407 or 1410, or we'd be at 512 Fifth Avenue or 520, or I can't remember all the numbers, but they were all pretty much in those days concentrated. Maybe you'd work in one all day and it was nothing but pretty much different dress companies. And another one might be a building we'd go to for coats and suits. There might be another one that was more sportswear. My Aunt Golden had all of that in her head, but Aunt Jane and I did not. So she encouraged me to write in my little book. Then the other little treat that they told me about the night before we started out, there were many of these little wallets. This was one of the last. We called it the kitty, and they shared their expenses. So they each gave me $100 to start and put me in charge of the kitty. I'm 13 years old. I know I look like I'm 18, and mentally I was probably at least 40 back then. I'm younger in my mind now than I was then. But I was responsible for the kitty. And that meant writing in the little book any cash payouts like taxi rides, keeping receipts for everything because they would need those for their taxes, any meals. I was in charge of paying the bill. I was in charge of figuring out the tips. All this was new to me. I hadn't had any of that responsibility in my life. And I remember Aunt Golden saying, "Jane, you're pushing her too hard. This is too much." And she said, "Sissy, she has to learn sometime." And Sissy would say, "Yes, but she doesn't have to learn everything in 1 week." And this was all flying back and forth over my head. I didn't care. I was in New York, and I was drinking it in just like I was breathing, and I loved every minute of it, and I could put up with whatever they wanted me to do. I pushed the elevator buttons. I was in charge of hailing taxis. That was so out of my comfort zone. Just get out in the street and put your arm out and get those girls in there, then pay the driver and get the receipt or write down how much it was. So I was very important. And then I had some experience. I had started actually working in Aunt Golden's store some when I was 12. So that's when she let me start using the cash register. And I'd certainly been there many times when salesmen would still come to call. And I knew how to write an order, but they hadn't let me do it much. But that trip, I wrote all of my Aunt Golden's orders. She had to sign them, but I wrote all the orders. I just was a busy girl. I really did work hard. Golden did not believe in taxis. I seem to have associated myself in my life with a lot of people who don't believe in riding much, because I was just telling you about my experiences in Philadelphia. No taxi. We'd take a taxi initially from the hotel down to the garment district all day long. Walk. So usually we'd have a brief small lunch, because during the times I went in particular, it was summertime, so it would be hot. And the last thing you want is a heavy meal and then be feeling draggy, because we had too much work to do in the afternoon. Plus, there was the promise every night, no matter what, we always had a nice evening meal. And usually one night we would do something special. So for my very first trip to New York, they decided that going to Radio City Music Hall would be my nice initial thing for me to experience. So I was real excited about that. There was a movie, and of course seeing the Rockettes. Of course, when we got there, I'm the one that has to get in line and speak and ask for the tickets and get all that straight. Way, way, way out of my comfort zone. And during all this time and back and forth and even walking in and out of these buildings trying to be Miss Professional, they were holding my hand. Everywhere we went, one or both of them were holding my hand. And it was really embarrassing, and I did not want my hand held. And I think I actually spoke up about it, and Sissy said, I would not be able to look your parents in the eyes when we got home if I lost you. I guess you wouldn't. And I'm holding on to you. So, yes, ma'am. You know how that goes. So we go to Radio City, and again, y'all, I'm enraptured with all things New York. I love everything about it. So happy to be there. We have our seats, and we've come in the middle of the movie, and we're going to see the end of the movie, then we're going to see the Rockettes, and then we're going to see the beginning of the movie. So at some point, I said to them, this column in front of me is really giving me a stiff neck because I have to look around it. Is it oak? There's an empty seat, right? It was across the aisle and one back. I said, may I please go just sit in that seat right there across the aisle? Because I really can't see very well here. And they said, fine. That's kind of a surprise, but they did. So I went over there and I had my seat, and there was a tall person sitting in front of me. So I moved over one more seat in. Well, after a little while, a man came and sat by me in that end seat. And after a little while after that, he put his hand on my knee. And I thought, oh no, that man's got his hand on my knee. I bet he doesn't realize it. I was 13, you all, and they let me wear a little more makeup up there, and I had on, some nice jewelry, and I'm sure I looked older, but I was not older. And I didn't want to say anything because I made any kind of a commotion. It had been bad enough, them holding my hand, but I was afraid that they would, not bring me another time, or they would get very upset. So I got my courage up and I said, sir, excuse me, but your hand is on my knee. And he said, oh, excuse me. And he moved it. Well, a little while later, his hand was back on my knee again. I thought, what am I going to do? And I was just trying to screw up my courage to say something again when we were back at the movie where we originally came in. And here comes Golden and Jane across the aisle. And the man looks up because there's these two older women, and they are in their black dresses with their Queen Elizabeth purses on their arm. And they said, honey, are you ready to go? This is where we came in. And I said, yes. And I got up and came out of the aisle. My heart was beating a million miles an hour. I was really glad to see him. And I laughed, and I thought, I wonder what he thinks of that. He was not expecting to see those older women come and collect me. Later on, when I was home from school one day, and if I was ever sick and I was well enough to look at TV and could get by with it, I watched a show called The Virginia Graham Show. It was a talk show, and it was from New York. And Virginia Graham was an older lady with fluffy blonde hair, and she always had on a pretty suit, and she sat on French furniture, and she talked to New York-type guests most of the time. And this one guest was sort of a comedian, and she said, I've been to Radio City, and somebody tried to pick me up. And she went on to say that she didn't know that if you went to Radio City and you sat in one seat, that it was an open invitation to get picked up, and that it was a code that everybody knew, but that she had missed that, and she didn't know that was a thing. I was so relieved. Because then I really officially knew what had happened to me, and I knew going forward, if I went anywhere in a big city, that I should not sit one seat in from the end alone. So that was sort of funny. Well, by the next summer, I was a seasoned pro. I knew how to push elevator buttons. I knew how to hail taxis. I had the drill down for my little book, and I'd keep what companies were in 1400 and what companies were in 1410. And I'd help them plan our days because you try to stay concentrated and, use your time and your distance wisely. And for our treat that time, we were going to go see Hello Dolly. That was going to be our big night. Well, one of their favorite restaurants, and one that I liked a lot, was Lindy's. And we always would go there, and we'd have a delicious meal, and we'd have cheesecake. But my real favorite was a restaurant called Patricia Murphy's White Turkey. And Patricia Murphy, I think, had maybe a place in Florida and a couple in New York at least. And it was a nice place with tablecloths. And this one was around 49th Street and 5th Avenue. It was real close to Rockefeller Center. And that particular trip, we were staying on Central Park South at a fancier hotel than usual because Aunt Jane had a friend whose son was the general manager. He was new there, and he had invited her when he'd been to Matthews to come check out his hotel. And it was called the St. Moritz, and it really was a lovely place. And so I remember we went back to the hotel and after work, and Aunt Jane said, "Sissy, can we have get a taxi to go to supper tonight?" And Sissy said no. She says, "No, we're going to walk. It's just 10 blocks." And and Aunt Jane, she wasn't really going to let up. She says, "Well, what if we split the difference? What if we get a taxi to go there? Because I'm so tired. We've worked hard today. And then we'll walk home and back to the hotel and walk off our supper." So she said, "Okay." So she relented. So they're still holding my hand, y'all. We're still holding my hand. But we go down to Patricia Murphy's, and the thing to get was the traditional turkey dinner. They had lots of things on the menu, but it had chestnut dressing, and you could get all breast meat for $1 extra. And I just thought it was heaven. Loved it. So we had a nice meal, and it was summertime, so it was still light outside. So we're sauntering back to the hotel, and we're window shopping, and it's on Fifth Avenue, and it was just a very nice evening, and we're heading on back up towards Central Park, and Aunt Jane says to us that she really needs to go to the bathroom, and she wants to hurry and get back to the hotel, so we need to pick it up. Well, you never needed to tell Aunt Golden to pick it up. Jane was the one that needed to pick it up because I was always trying to slow one down and hurry up the other. But holding my hand, we're heading on back, and with a good clip. And I think as we were approaching the hotel, I thought, I think I could make a break for it and have a few minutes to myself and act like a real New Yorker. When we get to the hotel, they had a nice newsstand. So I asked them as we were approaching the hotel, I said, I promise I'll come to the room straight from here, but can I go to the newsstand? I want to get a couple magazines and a newspaper, and I'll come right to the room. And Aunt Jane was distracted because she needed to go upstairs, and Golden said, okay. So they went. Well, I stretched out my time at the little gift shop place as long as I could, and I got the things that I wanted. And I had a key to the room, but there wasn't any point in me trying to use it to get in because they always put the bolt on. That was a rule. We always used the bolt if we were in the room. And so I knocked on the door, and there was no answer. And I knocked again, and it wasn't a yoo-hoo or anything. And the elevator dinged, and I looked down the hall, and here comes Golden and Aunt Jane looking extremely flustered, and it's been a good 20-25 minutes. Very flustered. And she's like, "Unlock the door." So I unlocked the door, and we go in. Well, they had gotten off on the wrong floor. They had gone to the room number that they thought was their room. The key didn't work. They saw a maid. They asked the maid to let them in their room. And now, who's going to say no to Golden Brooks and Emma Jane, who dressed in their black dresses with their Queen Elizabeth pocketbooks? Nobody. She let them in. They went in, and they surprised some poor man asleep in his bed who asked them what they were doing there. And they said, "What are you doing in our room?" And they had this big thing, and they were in the wrong room. So all that had happened, and I missed it. It may be just as well. So I thought, oh no, this is going to make it worse because they're going to be even more protective of me. But it didn't work out that way. They decided that it was really all my fault that they had gotten to the wrong room because they had gotten so used to me looking after them and pressing the elevator buttons and determining which way we needed to go and thinking through things that they had relaxed their standards and hadn't been observant as usual because they were relying on me. So it elevated me somehow. So all that worked in my favor. I forgot one little thing about that first visit, though, talking about their black dresses. I studied and I studied to get ready for New York, but one thing I didn't really have a grip on, again, was dressing. And again, I'm sure I was full of polyesters. But when I came down the elevator that Monday morning to go to the garment district for the first time, I was wearing my two-piece pink church dress with a little white design in it, a white hat, white cotton gloves, and white shoes. They were all in black. I could have gotten away, because it was hot summertime, and all the ladies had on hats everywhere we went. That we saw professional people outdoors. People were still wearing hats. This was 1965 or something. Yeah. With the white shoes, you all. And when I got home after that back to the hotel after that first day, those white cotton gloves they were so dirty and so black. I'm a quick study. I learned going forward that I would be just like my elders, and I would be wearing dark things from then on in New York. And the whole hat thing didn't last too much longer. But the white shoes, I've had nightmares about those white shoes since then. But moving on. So, oh goodness, going to see Hello Dolly was grand. And I'd always get, cheesecake at least twice while I was in New York. And the last day, we would take at least an afternoon and sometimes a whole day, and we'd go shopping because they wanted to buy shoes. And after all these years, they knew if you needed the soles of your shoes fixed, they had the best people for that. If you had a silk scarf that you loved with a stain, they knew where to take a beautiful scarf to get it dry cleaned. Or I remember Mont Golden had a favorite purse that at least twice over the years we took to have it relined. Who would have a handbag relined? But in New York, you could find craftspeople then, and maybe even still now, that do things like that. I learned a lot, and it was wonderful to have all that crash course. I resented it. I resented that Aunt Jane pushed me so much, but she was so good to me, and she really did want me to learn how to handle myself and be able to have confidence to take care of situations as they came up. And when you do it yourself, it's really the only way that you can learn. So the next year, I'm a seasoned pro of 15 or 16 by now, and Jane doesn't go on the summer trip because she's expecting my cousins Kathy and Chris. And my parents realized that my Aunt Golden was going to have a birthday while we were gone, and they gave me money to take her out for dinner somewhere nice for her birthday. So besides, I had my kitty to keep up with, I had the birthday money, and I don't remember the name of the hotel where we stayed that time, but I had noticed coming and going that there was a really pretty French restaurant near there, and they had a menu out front posted in one of those glass boxes, and it sounded nice, and the prices looked like it would fall into my budget. And so at some point I asked Sissy if she'd like to go there for a birthday, and she said yes, and I made a reservation. And so I wanted to be really in charge of this event, and part of it was I was thrilled that I didn't have to figure out transportation because we could walk. It was really close. It was probably just a block or something. So we went to the restaurant, and I had been to I believe it's CVS. I think those drugstores up there before we had them down here. And I'd bought some false fingernails, and she was very relaxed about letting me do things like that up there that she wouldn't let me do at home. But I remember I had mauve fingernail polish, and I thought it just looked so nice. And we both got dressed up, and we went to the restaurant, and it was really nice. And there was a maitre d' and a busboy that just had 2 or 3 tables. So he was right there, Johnny on the spot, and we had a nice meal. And at some point, they rolled over the dessert cart. And I don't think I told him it was her birthday or anything. She didn't want me to do that. But I'd never seen a dessert cart before, and they were just beautiful things. And I remember there was a silver bowl full of whipped cream, and next to it was a silver bowl full of strawberries, and I decided that's what I wanted. And the pie to selection was rum pie, and Mount Golden said that she would like to have that. So they cut her a slice of pie, and they put it on a plate, and then the man reached down the second shelf underneath the cart, and he pulled up a bottle of rum. Well, y'all, she was the biggest Baptist liquor hater that you. She had a great sense of fun and a fabulous sense of humor, but she thought that alcoholic spirits were the absolute work of the devil. And I thought, oh boy, she's going to say no. She didn't say anything. I don't know if she even realized at first what it was, but he poured a whole jigger. It looked like to me a whole jigger of rum, and he just poured it right over that pie. And then he took a big scoop of whipped cream and he put that on top, and he handed her the plate, and she ate every crumb. And she looked like she thoroughly enjoyed it. And I thought, well, this will be something I can tell Mom and Daddy and Aunt Jane when I get home. And we had a wonderful birthday, and we were finishing that up when one of my artificial fingernails fell off. And I'm trying to be so sophisticated, you all. When I went to New York, I really just wanted to be, just the last word of maturity and savoir-faire. And as I was getting ready to reach for my false fingernail, the busboy had seen it happen, and he had his little brush and his little silver thing, and he brushed my fingernail into the little dustpan table thing. I can't think of the word for it right now. And took it away. And I thought, oh no, I was not brave enough to ask for it back. Anyway, I paid the bill. I had plenty of money. I knew how to add the tip because that had been part of my Aunt Jane instruction. Got all that straight. And we walked back to the hotel. And I do remember that time I took my Aunt Golden's hand and we held hands and we went back to the hotel. And for years and years, I've probably been to New York more times than I can imagine, and probably at least half of those times I've been by myself. And I've always had confidence. I've always loved it. And that's been on my mind a lot lately with, so much sickness up there and everything. Only real regret I have in my life is that something I have control over was that I haven't lived in New York for a body of time. And as late as 3 or 4 months ago, I've said, but it's not too late. Maybe I'll still go up there sometime and stay 2 or 3 months. But I don't think that's ever going to happen now. But I still love to go, and I hope that I'll be able to go in the future. But it'll never be the same as going with those girls. Thanks.